So our next speaker is Danny Carroll. He works in the University of New South Wales Business School in Sydney and is the manager of the business digital learning element of that school. He leads a small team managing educational and assessment learning and technology platforms, large and small faculty projects like course outline systems, assurance systems, learning spaces, identification of risk systems, and the contribution of technology to curriculum renewal. Danny's research focus is on assessment, particularly on improving student engagement through self-assessment. So we'll hand over to you now, Danny.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Just going to press my timer button. Hi, everybody. Greetings from Sydney. Yes, I've been 10 years at the University of New South Wales in the business faculty, and we run assessment at a very big scale. So not only big courses, but lots of them. So today I want to talk about some systemic approaches that technologies have helped us to embed in the business school and some other faculties to improve assessment, not only in large courses, but in lots of courses. So we have an excellent assessment policy at my university. It speaks very, very strongly and embeds the ideas that we've heard today about assessment for learning. So we really, really do push criteria-based learning, clarity in assessment, development of student engagement and engagement in assessment for students. But one of the challenges we have is that we have such big courses. And so at my school, we have 300 courses every term. We have 16,000 students, and our big courses on the right, I don't know if it's covered up by your little video screens, we have lots of courses of 400, 500, 600 students. Now, one of the things that's actually helped us to embed criteria-based assessment supporting the development of standards-based assessment is the use of a system that we adopted 10 years ago from our sister university, University of Technology Sydney, UTS, called Review. A Review is an online criteria-based assessment that also supports self and peer assessment in a very nice way. And we can do things on this system that we struggle to do in the LMS. So all of the things I'm going to say is not just about technology. I have a teaching background. It's really about how do we do better assessment at scale and systematically across lots of courses. I've got a lot of interesting slides, but I'm going to go really, really quickly with a lot of them and let you read the stuff off the screen or later. But basically, for 10 years, we've had really, really good feedback from staff and students about increased clarity in assessment and being able to see what the feedback we're giving them. So it's a very, very fast and visual approach to marking on a standard-based scale of 0 to 100 that also tells students their band level of pass criteria, pass distinction and so on. But it helps, this approach helps both staff and students have a common language about the criteria and the feedback they get on the criteria. And behind that sits a lot of very, very granular data. Now, also I mentioned self-assessment. The self-assessment thing is optional, but when students do self-assessment, they often see a gap between what they thought they were going to get and what they actually did get. And that sort of starts an internal cycle of inquiry that David was referring to earlier. Now, in terms of staff give us a lot of good feedback because we're making a lot of the, taking away a lot of the admin work by making the data that sits behind marking processes visual and quick to see. So on the right-hand side of the screen, each of those rows is a student, and the little I represents that the student has read the feedback. Also on the screen, the markers see immediate distribution spreads, and on the left, lots and lots of exportable reports that come in CSV formats. But all of these things help people get to data. We're still with the staff. This example here is one of the reports that shows criteria by criteria which individual markers have been marking low on particular criteria and which have been marking high. And with this approach, we've been able to improve the assurance of the quality of the marking that we go on, because often somebody will be marking quite out of step with their colleagues, and that should be identified early and be the start of a conversation. Do you just have a weak class, or did you misunderstand the interpretation of the criteria we're marking towards? Now I'm going to show some examples from some large first year courses. One of my colleagues who has embedded self-assessment practice in all her tasks. And she's getting 90 to 95% of the students to do self-assessment online. So all of this is online, so we haven't been affected by COVID at all. In fact, we're more popular than ever. But this is a step to get students to engage with the criteria and to this, and she also does peer assessment, is to develop it into their practice, to be self-critical, reflective, be able to take on feedback better and adapt their performance. I've got a little bit of trouble seeing that because the video windows are in the way. So that's an example of the criteria self-assessment screen, but this is just a segue to, to get to here. This particular course is doing that good thing where feedback is embedded so that students can recycle it in following tasks. And here she's asked and rewarded students with a particular criteria worth 10%, where they say how they've incorporated the feedback from the first task in the subsequent tasks. And this is one thing that online software does really well. You can do this at tremendous scale. This is examples from a School of Management course. It's over 1,000 students. And basically, this is the number of times students read the online feedback. And we can see the students who didn't do self-assessment read the feedback about 7 times in the first task, but the students who did do feedback read it 8 or 8.5 times, whether they did self-assessment on both tasks, pointing to the relationship between self-assessment and self-efficacy, perhaps, but also a kind of one of those virtuous cycles where if students become engaged in a task by doing self-assessment, they're more likely to work closely with feedback. And the results for students were quite dramatic as well. Across all quartiles of performance, the orange shows that the students who did self-assessment always scored on average slightly higher marks than the students who did not do self-assessment in those quartiles. And we saw this in very, very many courses. That was a particularly big one. In my own research into student self-assessment accuracy, which you can read the details later, my findings were not too surprising. Students do tend to overestimate. Lots of studies show that. Guys overestimated more. What a surprise. But overall, students tended to improve their self-assessment accuracy when we gave them training, and that was fantastic. But the really good thing was it was both the strong students and the weak students were both capable of improving self-assessment accuracy. Both overestimators and underestimators got more accurate after we gave them feedback of their inaccuracy and feedback about their performance and how to improve. And so it was a really, really good thing. And we got good feedback from the students as well. So training in self-assessment, especially for weaker students, seems to be very beneficial. And what I took away from my thesis study was both the direction and distance of self-assessment inaccuracy is very informative to students. And on the right, it's especially important for those who strongly overassess or strongly underestimate, because they learn a lot about themselves and how they view the tasks and performance in the process. Here is a quick image of all of the overassessing students in a first year course, and the blue dots were the first task. So on the right side, the blue dots in the first task, they strongly overestimated, but the red dots in the second task, nearly every single strong overestimator learnt something and put in lower self-assessment estimates in the second task. But that's not the only thing they did. All of those people who were poor performers paid heed to the judgment gap that they could see in the software, and they tended to do 2 things. They really read the feedback, they responded to it, they improved their performance, but they also moderated their overinflated self-assessment estimates. So we had real evidence that self-assessment was a process that seemed to drive engagement with feedback and also help people to change cognitive approaches to improve performance.
Just 2 minutes, Danny.
Yep. We also on the system, we do a lot of peer-to-peer feedback. As you can see, we used to use WebPA, but we went off that a couple of years ago in about 2017. We built peer feedback into review with local money. Now we do it in hundreds and hundreds of courses at huge scale. So the example at the bottom of the screen had 171 groups in this online system. And it's bread and butter work for us at UNSW Business. So all of these approaches at scale are trying to drive student engagement in assessment systemically, to give them many, many chances to improve their reflective processes and their judgment processes, to give feedback to others and benefit from the feedback from others and get clear feedback from teachers. That image there just shows that we've got many, many different ways of grouping together students in peer feedback processes. We're nearly there. This one is just an example of a 3-stage peer review process where the final stage, and I quite agree with what David said about the main game is not to get students to rate each other, but in this final stage, what we got students to do was to rate the person who gave them the most useful feedback. So we turned it all about quality of feedback, and we did get the students to give each other a few marks for the students who gave the best feedback. And are they good at giving feedback? Well, they certainly are. And as a few speakers have said, when we model good practice, when we give them exemplars, when we tell them what we want, we were getting, as a few studies have shown, feedback just as good from the students to students as from our starting out tutors. 1 or 2 very quick slides at the end. Review is a system that collects everything, and a great thing is it keeps everything and it distributes everything. So for students, they can get back to all the previous years of feedback in review. It is not time limited like the LMSs. And also it provides them with the history of years and years of self-assessment practice so they can see if they've got more accurate in self-assessment over time. So basically, I want to end on the note of I was a former teacher. I did a lot of paper marking, but I think we've all got to look at the future of assessment being digitally mediated and really develop a serious conversation about assessment for learning based on really smart systems designed by teachers for teachers and learners. Thank you.